In previous videos, we've gone over the best of the best Xyz monsters by their ranks, but rank 4s are special. Rank 4 is the most commonly accessible rank of Xyz monster and also the rank most loaded with incredible cards. We're going to give rank 4s the respect they deserve and divide it into two categories: rank 4 monsters that are part of an archetype and the ones that aren't. And in this video, we're going over the ones that are part of archetypes. So far this list off at number 10, we have Gagaga Cowboy. This is an Earth Warrior rank 4 Xyz with generic materials, which has the effect that changes based on which battle position it's in. If it's in attack position, you can detach material in order to make it so it'll gain 1000 attack when it attacks an opponent's monster, as well as decreasing the opposing monster's attack by 500 points during the damage step. Basically allowing it to beat over anything with less than 3000 attack. If it's in defense position, you can deal a direct 800 points of damage to your opponent's life points. Cowboy is part of the Utopia adjacent archetype called Gagaga, alongside its similar sister archetypes like Goggo, Dododo, and Zubaba. That said, Cowboy is a generic rank 4 card that any rank 4 strategy could summon, and it's the main reason why it was such a big deal historically. In the height of the Xyz era, Yu-Gi-Oh! Wasn't quite as fast as it was these days, and games would often be decided by grinding out victories and slowly depleting your opponent's life points over the course of multiple combats. Gagaga Cowboy was at its peak in this era, as the ability to convert any two level 4 monsters into 800 direct damage was an invaluable asset in the extra deck for finishing off weakened opponents. The phrase "Cowboy for game" is one of the most iconic terms in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, to the point that people often say it for any game-winning burn effect even if it's not Cowboy doing it. That's not to say its other effect wasn't useful either. The ability to represent a 2500 attack monster that reduces another monster by 500 meant that Cowboy functioned like a 3000 attack beater when it needed to. And while there were other 3000 attack beaters in the rank 4 engine, they didn't bring the all-important burn utility that Cowboy does. Doubling up the utility for a single extra deck slot was quite useful. The effect is still useful even in faster and modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Despite one-turn kills being so much more common. Considering best of 3 matches frequently come down to time and round in competitive matches, the ability to quickly pull out a monster that can give you a life point lead is often the difference between winning and losing a match. Any rank 4 deck with a little space in its extra deck slot is very likely to run Cowboy just for its ability to win games that go down in time. Gagaga Cowboy is always finding ways to steal victory for players, and it's one of the most iconic rank 4s in history for that distinction. And at number 9, we have Daigusto Emeral. This is a wind rock monster with generic materials that has 2 effects. Once per turn, you can detach a material from Emeral either to target 3 monsters in your graveyard, shuffle them into your deck and draw a card, or you can target one non-effect monster in your graveyard and special summon it. Daigusto Emeral is technically part of the Gusto archetype, inhabiting their extra deck sub-archetype of Daigusto. That said, like many powerful archetype extra deck monsters, Emeral was notable for how useful it was outside of its native archetype. With completely generic rank 4 materials, Emeral basically meant every rank 4 engine deck had the ability to constantly recycle material from the graveyard and draw cards. It saw play in all sorts of rank 4 decks that like to fill up the graveyard as part of their core strategy, such as Lightsworn, Zombie Piles, and tons of different pendulum decks that had rank 4 engines baked into them. But Emeral is most notable for its inclusion in arguably the most dominant deck ever, Zoodiac. The Zoodiacs were the first rank 4 deck that could truly spam out tons of materials and rank 4 monsters thanks to the combination of cards like Zoodiac Broadbowl, Zoodiac Chonkanane, and Zoodiac Ratapir. Combine that with all the Zoodiacs constantly detaching and overlaying on top of each other, and Zoo was constantly filling its graveyard with cards that Emeral could shuffle back into the deck and extra deck in order to turn to real card advantage. Zoodiacs really abused the fact that Emeral wasn't a hard once per turn as well, frequently making multiple Emeralds and cycling through many extra draws in combination with cards like Elder Entity Norden and Fusion Substitute. Emeral was a big reason behind the concept that a normal summon Zoodiac Ratapir represents upwards of a +6 in card advantage. This kind of recycling and card drawing capability made it an instant staple in the decks and many others like Dangers and Lunalight decks that followed in the Link era, which made Emeral even more of a powerful and problematic card. In the past, once you resolve Emerald, it was just stuck on your field as an 1800 attack body. It still needed to be killed so you wouldn't draw more cards, but it wasn't a huge problem. But when powerful rank 4 decks got a hold of Link summoning, suddenly it was very easy to link off Emerald, summon another Emerald, and shuffle back the first Emerald to keep drawing cards. This would inevitably lead to Daigusto Emerald getting a spot on the limited list. Non-once per turn drawing power that loops itself is quite a dangerous thing to have around in multiples. Emerald is one of the few extra deck monsters to plainly draw you cards without some other kind of major offsetting factor, which has made it a constant inclusion in deck since its printing and one of the best rank 4 monsters ever. And at number 8, we have Primathmech Laplacian. This is an Earth Cyberus monster with 2000 attack and requires 3 monsters to Xyz summon, as opposed to the usual 2. Its first effect is that, if a Mathmech card you control would be destroyed by card effect, you can detach one material from Laplacian instead. Its more important effect is that when Laplacian is XC summoned, you can detach up to 3 materials from it, and get effects based on how many materials you detach. These effects include sending 1 random card of your opponent's hand to the graveyard, sending 1 monster your opponent controls to the graveyard, and sending 1 spell or trap card your opponent controls to the graveyard. And you can only choose each of these modes once. Laplacian is the primary payoff for the Mathmech archetype. It's best known for being used as the monster summoned off of Mathmech Superfactorial. This transforms Laplacian from a going second utility monster that clears the board to an absurdly powerful piece of interaction on your opponent's turn, letting you trigger its XC summon effect so long as you have 3 Mathmech monsters in your graveyard. The ability to combine non-targeting removal on both spell traps and monsters in the same effect is powerful enough, but a random hand rip is really good at depriving your opponent of any extenders they could have after you disrupt their opening plays with your removal effect. In combination with Mathmech Diameter being summoned off of Superfactorial, Laplacian suddenly comes equipped with an Omni Negate on top of everything else. This crazy card represents a 4-for-1 on its own. Technically, this has always existed in Mathmech and didn't see much play outside Rogue Tier for a few years. But with the archetype defining release of Mathmech Circular, suddenly accessing a full-powered Superfactorial was trivial for Mathmech, and they finally had an easily searchable starter that could play through hand traps. This one-card setup to get such a powerful boss monster and a piece of interaction Laplacian even got Mathmech Circular recently limited. In recent years, it's been one of the highest impact and highest power rank 4s hanging around the metagame, and unlike many of the other archetypal XCs monsters on this list, it plays slowly within its intended deck. I would also like to give an honorable mention to Primathmech Laplacian, Laplacian's partner in crime for the XC's Mathmech monsters. It's an incredibly potent extender as an archetypal rank 4 who you can give almost as much credit as Laplacian for Mathmech's capabilities to even set up Superfactorial and be a competitive deck. But Laplacian is really the powerhouse of this Mathmech duo, so it gets the nod on this list. And stealing the number 7 spot on this list, we have Time Thief Redoer. This is a dark psychic monster with 2400 attack and generic materials. Its first effect is, once per turn on either player's standby phase, Redoer gobbles up the top card of your opponent's deck and adds it to itself as a material. Redoer can then use its materials to great effect, as it has a quick effect to detach up to 3 materials from itself, and you get different effects based on what kinds of cards you detach. If it's a trap, you can tuck away 1 face-up card your opponent controls back to the top of their deck without targeting. And most importantly, if it's a monster, you can banish Time Thief Redoer until the end phase. Time Thief Redoer is the boss monster of the Time Thief archetype. A seldom played, if very favorable and neat rank 4 strategy. That said, thanks to its generic materials, Redoer is one of the most frequently played rank 4s in basically all rank 4 strategies since its release. All 3 of its effects are great. The trap effect is some of the best removal in the game, and can even set you up for your next card steal, as you can put a face-up card of your choice on top of your opponent's deck for Redoer to steal during the next standby phase. Drawing a card is obviously insanely good, as card draw in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is one of the most broken mechanics you can employ. But the reason the monster effect is the most important is that it makes Redoer incredibly hard to answer, because as long as it has a creature attached to it as a material, Redoer can dodge attempts to remove or interact with it, pop back on the field later, and potentially threaten your next turn with its own effect or perhaps a timely visit from Zeus. It has a long history of being included in lots of rank 4 decks like Lunalight and Orcust, who loved it for being a powerful card that you could summon after darklocking yourself. These decks would often use it alongside a small Phantom Knights engine that would include the Phantom Knights of Rusty Bardiche to search out the Phantom Knights of Shade Brigande, which sets up rank 4 summons and puts a trap under Redoer, giving you both a consistent piece of non-targeting quick effect removal, and letting Redoer dodge interaction with a monster as its other material. Most recently, Redoer came back into the spotlight again during the incredible dominance of tier limits. The odd thing about Redoer is, unlike most XYZ monsters, it detaches its material for effect instead of as a cost. This means that a Redoer made with a tier limits Rhinoheart or tier limits Shiren could trigger their graveyard effects to set up tier combos after detaching them for its own effect. This meant you could consistently get your Shiren diffused on your turn after you summoned it with its card effect if you ever happened to mill one, or just do it on your opponent's turn, playing out your combo like the tier limits always love to do. Time Thief Redoer is just such a versatile and powerful card that whenever a top tier deck has rank 4 access available, you're very likely to see Redoer taking up extra deck spaces in top decks. Next up at number 6, we have Exosister Mikailis. This is a light warrior monster with 2500 attack. It cannot be destroyed by battle with any monster special summon from the graveyard. When Mikailis is XC summoned with an Exosister as a material, on this same turn Mikailis can, as a quick effect, target one card in your opponent's graveyard or one card they control and banish it. Also, you can detach one material from Mikailis and add one Exosister spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. Exosister Mikailis is technically a generic rank 4. but both of its important effects do require you to play Exosister cards, so it does function like a truly archetype-specific rank 4. But that's alright, as its effects are absolutely bonkers in an Exosister deck. Its first effect to banish any card your opponent has on the field or in the graveyard is an incredibly versatile removal tool. Most removal effects do not interact with the graveyard, but Mikailis really fits into Exosisters' theme of locking out the graveyard while still having powerful interaction against decks with no graveyard shenanigans. And while the effect does seem limited by it only being usable on the turn Mikailis is Xe summoned, that's hardly a big deal. Exosisters' core gameplay revolves around slamming down all their Xyz monsters during your opponent's turn. Thanks to effects like Exosisters Magnifica, which you can make with Mikailis and then summon Mikailis using Magnifica as a material on your opponent's turn, or a card like Exosister Returnia, which lets you Xe summon your opponent's turn with its first effect. And what do you know? Mikailis' second effect lets you search out Returnia to set all this up. Mikailis' spell and trap card lineup is the backbone of the Exosister deck, letting you search for cards like Exosister Pax, which functions like an emergency teleport for the deck most of the time, and really lets you extend your plays. Or it can search other plainly powerful backrow interactions like Exosister Vadis, which lets you special summon 2 Exosister monsters from your deck on your opponent's turn, which itself sets up entire powerful combo lines. Exosisters is largely seen as an anti-meta deck, but it's so powerful on the back of cards like Mikailis that it's had far more success than most anti-meta strategies, winning major tournaments despite being released in the highest power Yu-Gi-Oh format we've seen. Mikailis serves as the heart and soul of the deck strategy, and really is just all around insanely powerful as a rank 4 monster for the archetype. And with the next step on this list, at number 5, we have both Evolzar Laggia and Evolzar Dolkka. These rank 4 monsters are both fire dragons and require 2 level 4 dinosaur monsters for their Xyz materials. They only have minor stat differences, with Dolkka sporting 2300 attack and 1700 defense, compared to the slightly superior stats of Laggia, which boasts 2400 attack and 2000 defense. Evolzar is a sub-archetype of the Evol archetype whose gimmick is based on some sort of Pokemon-style evolution, where the Evotile reptile monsters evolve into the stronger Evolzar dinosaurs, who then evolve into the powerful boss monsters from the extra deck in the Evolzar dragon monsters. What makes Laggia and Dolkka particularly special amongst rank 4s is an effect that is actually quite unusual for rank 4 monsters. They have quick effect negations. Dolkka can negate and destroy any monster effect when it's activated, whereas Laggia can negate any normal or special summon as well as spell and trap card activations. If you'll notice, all the previously mentioned Xyz monsters on this list, while powerful, don't give access to generic negation abilities, and that's a theme for rank 4 monsters. They're incredibly powerful and versatile, but the quick effect negations are few and far between. This was so valuable that for a long time, just being able to access Laggia and Dolkka during the Xyz era was the basis for one of the best decks around at the time, Dino Rabbit, a deck that used Rescue Rabbit's effect to special summon 2 level 4 normal monsters from the deck to go into a pair of vanilla dinosaurs, and immediately overlay them for Dolkka or Laggia. This let players convert one normal summon into one of the most powerful pieces of interaction available in Yu-Gi-Oh! And that was good enough to be a top tier deck for quite some time. Laggia and Dolkka's time doesn't end there though. Later on, with the release of the Dino Smashers Fury Structure deck, dinosaurs as a creature type became its own standalone strategy, equipped with a whole slew of incredibly powerful dinosaur specific support like Soliding Oviraptor and Miscellaneousaurus. This deck had a very robust rank 4 engine built into it and could easily get out both Dolkka and Laggia at the same time. Really hammering home this pair of dinosaur bosses is one of Yu-Gi-Oh's more intimidating board to stare down. Doubly so with Miscellaneousaurus backing them up to protect the materials from interaction, a problem that would eventually earn it a home on the limited list. Dino was one of the best decks of its era and stayed competitive for years, and to this day is a very strong rogue strategy. And it all started with Dolkka and Laggia putting the creature type on the map with some of the best effects of any rank 4 monsters. These two monsters are incredible and are both similarly powerful, making distinguishing them one from another a pointless exercise. They both deserve the spot as a duo for just how big of an impact they've had on rank 4 decks and competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole. Following at number 4 for our rank 4s, we have Tellarknight Ptolemaeus. This is a light warrior monster with 550 attack and 2600 defense. It has an effect where, once per chain as a quick effect, you can detach 3 materials from this card to special summon 1 Xyz monster that's 1 rank higher, excluding number monsters, using Ptolemaeus as a material. Its second effect allows you to detach 7 materials from it to skip your opponent's next turn. Finally, once per turn during your end phase, you can attach a Tellarknight card from your extra deck to Ptolemaeus as a material. Tellarknight Ptolemaeus belongs to the sub-archetype of the Stellar Knights, the Tellarknights. Ptolemaeus has some quite powerful effects, and the first one that might catch your eye is that it can skip your opponent's next turn. And while that is a game-breakingly strong effect, this 7 material requirement is almost impossible to consistently pull it off. The funny thing about that is that Ptolemaeus users found a second way to skip your opponent's turn, the always broken Outer Entity Azathoth. Ptolemaeus' ability to rank up as a quick effect to any rank 5 made it an instant problem when combined with the lingering floodgate that Azathoth set up on its turn. When done on your opponent's turn, it robs them of the ability to use any monster effects, and that's usually just as good as a turn skip for most decks. This functionally turned any rank 4 setup into a quick effect as a thought, as Ptolemaeus' ability to attach another monster to it in the end phase made it so you didn't even need to commit a third monster to its XC summon to get its quick effect rank up online. Thankfully, Azathoth was banned for this and many other reasons. And while the effect alone was certainly broken enough to get Ptolemaeus on this list, that's not even the end of the story. As mentioned previously with Laggia and Dolkka, quick effect negations are hard to come by for rank 4 engines. Well, Ptolemaeus had another friend to rank up into, Cyber Dragon Nova. This monster on its own is a rather innocuous card, but it can freely rank up into the much more dangerous Cyber Dragon Infinity, a beast of a boss monster who comes equipped with both a removal effect that can attach any attack mode monster to itself as a material, as well as a quick effect Omni-Negate, thus solving the problem of any rank 4 strategy that's hungry for negation. The only downside in the setup is you can't do this rank up on your opponent's turn, as the Nova to Infinity rank up isn't a quick effect, so this line did require a much heavier investment of 3 level 4s. Still, this effect was frequently well worth it for the more powerful rank 4 engines that had the extra deck room and craving for a powerful boss monster. Tellarknight Ptolemaeus served a long time on the ban list for these abuses of its ability, only recently coming off thanks to power creep making Cyber Dragon Infinity line not quite as good, and, more importantly, Azathoth's permanent place on the ban list. Still, Ptolemaeus is responsible for one of the most game-breaking and easy-to-access combo lines of all time. Turning any 2 level 4 monsters into a near-automatic game-winning floodgate is certainly enough to earn it a spot on this list. And speaking of game-winning floodgates, taking the number 3 spot on this list, we have number 86 Heroic Champion Rhongomyniad, or Rhongo for short. Rhongo is a Dark Warrior 1500 attack and defense and can only be made with 2+ level 4 warrior monsters, to a maximum of 5. Rhongo has additive effects based on how many materials it has. At 1 material, it can't be destroyed by battle. At 2 materials, it gets another 1500 attack and defense. At 3, it becomes unaffected by other card effects. And at 4, it prevents your opponent from normal or special summoning monsters. And at 5, it gains the effect to destroy all cards your opponent controls once per turn. To offset this, Rhongo detaches 1 material during your opponent's end phase if it's able to. Rhongo is one of the most degenerate monsters in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is fairly funny considering it hails from a rather mediocre rank 4 archetype known as Heroic, which includes the main deck Heroic Challengers and the extra deck Heroic Champions like Rhongo. The real dangerous part about Rhongo is its 3rd and 4th effects. Being plainly unaffected by any cards is incredibly powerful and makes it an exceedingly hard to out-boss monster, especially since it also can't be destroyed by battle. You could potentially make a monster with a high enough attack to get over its 3000 attack and get enough damage in for lethal, but that becomes infinitely harder with Rhongo's 4th effect completely locking out of summoning anything at all. Vanity's Emptiness is a card that is likely never coming off the ban list, and it's significantly easier to deal with while also only stopping special summons. Rhongo's ability to cut off even normal summons makes it arguably the most degenerate floodgate of all time. It's an unaffected tower-style boss monster that you can't even answer with a kaiju because its special summon lock prevents it. The only thing that ever held Rhongo back was its rather stringent requirements. For a very long time, getting 4 level 4 warrior monsters in the field to get the best of Rhongo's effect was exceedingly difficult. You could potentially pull it off in a deck like Heroic, though the first deck to really be able to summon Rhongo with any competitive consistency was Tellarknights, and usually only after a turn to setup where the deck could play from its graveyard with cards like Tellarknight Altair. The thing about incredibly busted boss monsters is it doesn't matter how powerful the card is. If there isn't a competent deck that can actually summon it, it's not going to be a problem. There are plenty of theoretically broken Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters that have never been a problem because they're too hard to summon. The deck that eventually turned Rhongo into a problem was a powerful standalone warrior archetype in the Phantom Knights. Thanks to cards like the Phantom Knights' Shade Brigandine and the Phantom Knights' Stained Greaves, the deck had searchable access to level 4 warriors to get Rhongo the field at 2 materials. It would also frequently run identical level 4 monsters that synergize with the deck like Dark Refer and Armageddon Knight. But what really made Phantom Knights the best abuser Rhongo was they can get it to the field while also being an incredibly good rank 3 deck, thus giving them access to number 75 Bamboozling Gossip Shadow. A respectable rank 3 monster in its own right, Gossip Shadow immediately broke the sole limitation of Rhongo by being able to attach itself and its materials to Rhongo, thus turning a much easier to summon 2 material Rhongo into a completely unbeatable 5 material Rhongo. Once this deck started seeing the light of day, the uproar against it was unanimous, and Konami swiftly banned Rhongo from the TCG. Rhongo isn't just broken, it's entirely unfun to play against in every way. Without some hyper-specific answer like XC's Encore, there is literally no answers to a fully stacked Rhongo in the game besides very questionable strategies like Burn. That kind of unstoppability deserves a spot on this list, even if it doesn't deserve anything else besides a permanent residence on the forbidden list. And at number 2 on this list, we're just throwing all of the Zoodiacs here. Though if you had to pick one as the standout, it would be Zoodiac Broad Bull. But since we don't want half the list to just be Zoodiac monsters, we're going to put them all right here. As you might expect, these Xyz monsters all belong to the Zoodiac archetype. This series of Earth Beast Warrior monsters is arguably the most dominant archetype in the history of the game, ushering in one of the most extensive Tier 0 formats ever. The problem with Zoodiacs is they're not really rank 4 monsters. While any rank 4 deck can spend 2 monsters to summon Chakanane or Broad Bull, Zoodiac only needs to use any one Zoodiac monster on the field, and it can rank up right into any Zoodiac Xyz monster that way, completely cheating the main limitation in extra deck summoning. This made them functionally an entire archetype of Link 1 monsters before Link monsters even existed, and each and every one of them is incredibly good in their own ways. Broad Bull is the most notoriously broken monster, letting you search out any Beast Warrior monster from your deck so as long as it can be normal summoned. While this was usually used to go and fetch the equally busted Zoodiac Rat Pier, any rank 4 deck with some Beast Warrior synergies could abuse this. Imagine Lunalights at full power with Broad Bull legal, letting them easily search out Lunalight Tiger, and you can see how this broken generic searching effect might be problematic, even without the rest of the other Zoodiacs. The star Zoodiac monster that stuck on the field was of course Zoodiac Trident, who came equipped with a quick effect to destroy a face-up card in the field once per turn. Trident is presumably locked out of decks besides Zoodiac with its immense 4 level 4 monsters to Xyz summon requirement without using the Zoodiac cheat. But the problem with Trident is any rank 4 deck could turn 2 level 4 monsters into a Broad Bull or Chakanane and then just overlay Trident on top of them, still getting a free +1 in the case of Broad Bull. That's incredible card advantage and onboard interaction off of a generic rank 4 for any deck, though Zoodiac as an archetype in its own right definitely abused it the best. These two were the stars of the 8 months of dominance Zoodiac had in the TCG, though the others were still great. Zoodiac Chakanane gave Zoodiac the ability to special summon from the graveyard to build up on field material, oftentimes setting up both Trident and Hammer Kong on the field at the same time, letting you make use of Hammer Kong's ability to protect the Zoodiacs from targeting and keep your Trident safe. Tiger Mortar lets you attach a Zoodiac monster from your graveyard to another Zoodiac monster, which lets you set up defensive effects like Zoodiac Ram Ram or Zoodiac Bunny Blast on your Trident, as well as helping enable any number of combos thanks to the material manipulation. Even Borbo, the seemingly most innocuous Zoodiac who had the least impact during Zoodiac's Tier 0 reign due to having effect to attack directly, which wasn't that important in 2017, suddenly became an incredibly useful monster long after Zoodiac's heyday with the release of Zeus. Suddenly, having a rank 4 monster any deck can generically access through Chakanane that can both attack directly and then stack a whole bunch of other materials on top of itself for free with the other Zoodiac names was obscenely powerful, often letting decks get a 6 material Zeus on the field with little effort. A beast of a threat that only negation or kaiju style monsters can usually deal with. We could spend all day talking about just how incredibly good the Zoodiacs were. One of the best archetypes chock full of an entire roster of broken rank 4 monsters. It would really take an obscenely busted card to stand out above these beast warriors. Anyway, claiming the number 1 spot on this list, we have Lavalval Chain. I know, what a surprise. Lavalval Chain is, surprisingly, technically part of an archetype as a member of the Lavals, being part of another extra deck based sub-archetype in the Lavalvals. But despite the card presumably being good in Lavals, that's not what this card represents. Lavalval Chain is a completely generic rank 4 that can detach material to either send any card from your deck to the graveyard, or stack any card from your deck on top of your deck. Lavalval Chain is a frequent inclusion in many of our top 10 best of lists. It's famous for its synergy with Infernities, being able to stack the deck with an Infernity Archfiend, or get Infernities into the graveyard to summon with your Infernity Necromancer. It does this while also being easily accessible as Infernities was a great rank 4 deck. It was an instrumental part of the Tier 0 format with Necros, who would abuse it to put the fellow banned monster Jin Releaser Rituals into the graveyard to set up a ritual summon monster that locked your opponent out of special summoning entirely. Rogue decks like Hero could send an Elemental Hero Shadow Mist to the graveyard to get a free search. Shadows had an entire archetype full of monsters that would trigger them being sent to the graveyard and loved playing this. Any deck with any kind of graveyard synergy of any kind likely wanted to play Lavalval Chain, and it made rank 4 access an absolute necessity as long as it was legal. If you take a look at Curious Lightsword Dominion, it has a completely identical effect to Lavalval Chain despite being magnitudes more difficult to summon, and Curious was still good enough to earn a spot on the ban list besides Lavalval Chain. And the most sickening thing about this card is it's not even a hard once per turn. Any deck that could convert a Foolish Burial to the graveyard into a rank 4 could just go into another Lavalval Chain. Something Infernity specifically was well known for pulling off multiple times a turn. The biggest hindrance to Lavalval Chain was that you only had 5 zones to work with while it was legal. If the card ever existed alongside Link monsters, and you can crash into it after you get its effect off. Who knows how crazy you can go after doing that. Doubly so, since a rank 4 strategy could just recycle them all over again with our fellow member on this list, Daigusto Emeral. The card has been banned long enough that we probably have never and will never see what it is truly capable of. It's scary to think that a Vanity's Emptiness style special summoning lock with Jhin might be small potatoes in the grand scheme of things of how broken Lavalval Chain truly could be with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Power creep where it is today. While Konami probably should have never printed the card, let's just be thankful we're safe and sound from it destroying any format it's part of, so long as it's locked behind the Forbidden list. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any other rank 4 monsters that are part of an archetype you think belongs in this list? Or are there any other topics you'd like us to cover? If so, leave those suggestions down in the comments below.